Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Welcome to episode 148 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. My name is Tim Robertson. I'm the host of the podcast and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Hey, thanks for downloading and listening. The ALPO collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomenon and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, also known as the Australian Astronomer. This podcast depends upon you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can start by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can help us out by going to www.patreon.com/observersnotebook. If you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. And just to let you know, if you're listening to this as it's released, membership prices will go up to $23 a year beginning January 1st, 2023. So get on now. You can find out more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for The Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, we're going to talk about planets, specifically Venus and Saturn. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook podcast. And we have a twofer today. We're going to talk about Venus and the ALPO, and then we're going to talk about Saturn. And because we're talking about those two planets, we have Julius Benton here, the coordinator of both sections. Welcome to the podcast, Julius.
Yes, glad to be here.
Yeah, it is. Now, before we get into it, why don't you just give everybody a little bit of background about yourself before we get started?
Yes, I joined the ALPO back in 1967. I've been the coordinator for both the Venus and the Saturn sections since 1971, continuously unbroken. And I've been the executive director on multiple times while I've been a part of the ALPO. And I'm currently serving on the board of directors as well. And I'm a retired aerospace professional, and I retired back in 2014. And I'm enjoying doing this stuff with the ALPO now and collecting observations and doing a lot of pro-am work.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about the Venus section. First, give us an overview of the section itself.
Okay, the Venus section, we have about 80 observers.
Oh, wow.
We have several observing programs that we're involved in. A lot of it's visual drawings.
Mm-hmm.
We get drawings from all over the world, and also a lot of images taken at various wavelengths, ultraviolet images and infrared images that observers send to me, and we publish those in our journal at the end of an apparition. So our mission is to collect as many observations and cooperate with the pro-am efforts that we're involved in.
So what type of equipment is needed to contribute to the section?
Well, we don't set some inflexible minimum. An observer who may have a small refractor, like a 3-inch refractor,
Mm-hmm.
is certainly fine, and a little bit larger aperture would allow you to see a little bit more and do a little bit more with the imaging. Of course, the smaller instruments sometimes take advantage of inadequate seeing sometimes when you've got turbulence that's causing some issues with larger apertures. But we have observers who are using instruments up to about 14 inches or more, and the average observation that's coming in is around an 8-inch telescope. A lot of observers are using those size instruments. And it doesn't matter design, Newtonians, catadioptrics, Schmidt gas cranes, and that sort of type of instrument. And
Okay.
we encourage observers to get a good collection of filters to be able to enhance the viewing opportunities, to reduce a lot of the contrast and glare that's so common with Venus, because the atmospheric features are pretty elusive for those who aren't well tutored in observing Venus.
So you mentioned filters. What type of filters would you recommend?
Well, we recommend the Rattan series filters, blue filters like the W38A or a violet W47 filter. And then, of course, the UV filters that are available from various sources allow imaging in the UV, because a lot of the markings that show up in the UV you can't see visually.
Yeah, I've used the Rattan 47 filter. It's like a deep purple,
yes,
or violet filter, and
yeah,
it really knocks down the light and gives you a good opportunity to look at the upper atmosphere of Venus.
Well, we encourage observers, because Venus is so bright. If you're observing against a dark sky, a variable density polarizer helps improve the visibility of faint, reducing the glare. That really helps a lot with Venus.
Okay. So what did you see in like the last apparition of Venus, and what are you seeing now that's new, different, interesting?
Well, most of the things that people are seeing right now are the typical features that are visible on in the atmosphere of Venus. Banded dusky markings that run parallel across the illuminated disk of the planet, perpendicular to the line of the cusps. Radial dusky markings, the V shape and Y shape markings that are really mostly visible in the UV images. You rarely see them visually. And then there are all sorts of markings, amorphous dusky markings and irregular dusky markings in the atmosphere of Venus. It takes some consistency in observing and getting used to training your eye to know what to look for. Venus is tricky.
Yeah, it is. But I think once you use filters, or even like you mentioned, the neutral density or the polarizing filter would be the way to go with it.
Oh, yeah. The UV filters around 380 nanometers. So the contrast drops off rapidly at about that wavelength. And that's why it's at the lower limit of the average human eye. You can't really see a whole lot of the markings that I was talking about that are common in the UV, because, you can't see UV, of course.
Right. Now, it's currently a morning object, right?
Yes. The apparition started back in January. It was inferior conjunction, and it was a disk of 63.3 arc seconds in diameter. And then, of course, as the apparition has progressed, the greatest elongation west from the sun was back in March, and then the apparition will wrap up in October, and we've got a lot of observers who are just continuing to follow through. Venus is a gibbous disk right now; it'll be full by the time it reaches superior conjunction.
Okay. So, what other features are they seeing on the planet now?
Well, the thing is that this is something that I'm going to talk about the PROAM mission that is ongoing right now. We had an alert come out. We're active in the Akatsuki program. This is a JAXA space program. It's a climate orbiter that is assessing the climate features on Venus, and is probing Venus to gather all the data that's possible. One of the interesting things that we posted the alert about was the cloud discontinuity that's been occurring in the mid-level clouds of Venus. That cloud level is about 40 kilometers above the surface of Venus, and they rotate. Venus is retrograde. They rotate about every 5 days, like a super rotation at that mid-level. You don't see that because the images are not. I mean, the cloud discontinuity is hidden below the upper level clouds that are at about 70 kilometers above the surface of the planet. And that's where you have the super rotation 4-day period. And this this discontinuity is a strange looking linear feature that extends from north to south. It can extend along the limb of Venus or near the terminator. And we're trying to image these. Amateur astronomers, as well as the professional team, is imaging these and collecting all the images that we've got to go study this effect of the cloud discontinuity. It's something that the Akatsuki mission has really requested that we send as many observations as we can, and we've been sharing that data. We're getting observations worldwide, and most of these images are taken at 742 nanometers in the infrared. That's where it's most visible.
Okay. Now you mentioned that you have about 80 observers, active observers in the group right now for Venus.
Yes, out of that 80 right now, we've got about 40 that are really sending in the observations as part of this program. We're getting them almost daily. We've got 700 individual images that have already been submitted for this effort.
Wow. Who are some of your big contributors, if you want to give their names?
We've got guys in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
Got people in Portugal, Clyde Foster in South Africa. We've got Greg Shanos down in Sarasota, Florida, and we have it's worldwide right now, and we encourage more and more observers to continue sending in their data. We've got a good team of observers, and we're getting observations that are collected, are imaged. The planet has been imaged, documenting the reality of this cloud discontinuity on the same date and near the same time. That's why it's so important to have confirming observations.
Okay. Yeah, I see observations on social media, and I'll reach out to the observer and say, hey, have you submitted these to the ALPO? And then, oh, no, they're not good enough. And yes, they are good enough. I mean, if you're observing Venus either visually and making drawings or doing images, imaging, send them in. We could always use more.
There's no such thing as a bad observation. Send them in, even if it's a verbal description of what you're able to see in the telescope. We encourage some beginners who are starting out drawing Venus. Don't get discouraged, because it may take some while to get used to what to look for, and that's why the filters are so important.
Yes,
to help bring out some of the detail. Observing Venus, if as much as possible in the daytime, in the daylight, or bright sky, really helps reduce all that glare. And we tell observers who are beginning, don't give up, keep persisting.
Yeah, and that's really a good tip too, because if you observe during the daytime, you're not dealing with it's not a bright dot against a dark sky. You have better contrast at that point.
A lot of times, Venus is so bright that it's fairly easy to find in a twilight sky, and you can follow it into the morning sky or in the evening sky if you just keep looking, and get a pair of binoculars if you have trouble spotting it. But it's bright enough that it's hard to miss.
That's definitely hard to miss. So your observations, are they all published in the journal, or do you have another place where they're published?
They're published in the journal. Of course, we share all the observations with the JAXA Akatsuki team.
Okay.
And there's some papers coming up in the future that will recognize some of our observations. And that team keeps soliciting observations from us, and they keep recommending that we be consistent with sending in the data, and just wait and see what they can come up with, comparing their information that's from the spacecraft as well as what we see, and there's good correlation.
Okay. Now, if a newbie wants to start observing Venus, is there some materials out there they could read to learn how to do it and how to go about it?
Well, there's a monograph that's published that I wrote some months ago. Actually, it's a couple of years ago. It's been updated constantly. It's a PDF file that can be downloaded from our ALPO website.
Okay.
It addresses visual observations of Venus as well as imaging. And we encourage the observers to download that manual. And then, of course, all the drawing blanks are available also on our website. There's no cost.
Oh, very good. So it's all free. All they have to do is start observing and send you their observations.
Well, if somebody wants it and can't access it too easily, I can send it. Someone send it to my email. And, of course, I can send it to them. It won't cost anything. I can really send it without any issues.
Okay, and I will attach your email to the show notes underneath the podcast so people can contact you that way. Great. Is there anything about Venus you want to talk about?
Well, that's what we're doing. We're continuing to follow it through until October approaches.
Okay.
The planet is smaller and smaller in angular diameter, and it's pretty low now in the morning sky, and the seeing conditions are a little bit troublesome for a lot of observers, but once it's gone, and it'll come up next after October, about November or December of this coming fall or winter. it'll be an evening star, as people refer to it a lot of times.
Right. It'll be a good Christmas star this year.
Oh, yeah.
Very good. Very good. All right. So let's move on to the other planet that you are coordinator of, the Saturn section. How about giving a brief overview of what you do there?
All right. The Saturn section is an active, very active program. We have over 150 observers that are periodically send in data from time to time, and our main mission is to coordinate the regular systematic investigations of Saturn on a regular basis. Saturn is a fascinating planet. It's one of the most beautiful objects to see in the sky, especially for a beginner who's never seen the planet before. A Saturn apparition lasts about 378 days, a little longer than a year between conjunctions. And we encourage observers to start observing and follow through from the time that it appears in the sky after it reaches well-placed position in the sky. And of course, one thing that's coming up soon, the apparition, the 2022-23 apparition is already underway. And we have the following information. We're looking at opposition to the sun occurring on August the 14th. That's fast approaching.
Right. And opposition, for those of you that don't know, is when the planet is directly opposite the sun in the sky. So as the sun sets, the planet comes up, and that way you can watch it all night long. So oppositions are pretty cool and it's also closer to the Earth at that point, correct?
Well, the other thing too is that it's well positioned for observing most of the night. If you can catch it high enough in the sky, because that makes it easier to view without turbulence or atmospheric dispersion causing problems. And turbulence causes a lot of problems for people with larger telescopes sometimes. So we don't. It's inflexible minimum of the type of aperture that can be used or the type of telescope. Most observers find that a telescope of 6 inches or more gives some of the best views of Saturn, but we don't discourage any observations with smaller apertures. Some people have done great work with 4-inch refractors, for example. And so imaging is something that we are encouraging. People still draw Saturn, visual, still active doing that. We have blanks that are available for people to use on the website. And my book about observing Saturn and how to observe it is available on Amazon. And also there's a monograph that is available on our website that talks about visual observations of Saturn that might not be something that people don't do as much of because of all the imaging going on. But we encourage visual observations as much as possible.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So what are your expectations for this year's apparition?
Well, so far we're starting to, observers are starting to record discrete phenomena in the northern hemisphere of Saturn. The tilt of the rings is such that you are seeing observers are seeing the northern hemisphere of Saturn in the north face of the rings. There have been some curious white streaks in the equatorial band of Saturn at +5 degrees Saturnographic latitude. Some curious white streaks and spots in the northern equatorial belt, and also some features that are in the equatorial zone and the other regions of the northern hemisphere. Now that Saturn is at the tilt that it's at right now, around 18 degrees and diminishing in the tilt, more and more of the southern hemisphere of Saturn is peeking out beneath the rings, where you're starting to see some of the belts and zones in that region.
Yeah, Saturn is quickly becoming edge on in a few years, right?
Yeah, 2024 is when the next edgewise apparition will occur.
So if you want to see the rings of Saturn, now's the time to do it before they go straight on with the plane of the Earth.
Yeah, we're about the tilt right now is 7 degrees right now. That's what it'll be at opposition on October the 14th, and it continues to diminish after that. And then Saturn was fully open to 27 degrees when the rings were fully open, and you had the full view of the northern hemisphere back in 2017. That was in October. That was when Saturn was at its summer solstice. And then as the as the apparition continues, the rings are closing up. And it's going to be fascinating to start seeing shadow transits and also satellite transits across the disk of Saturn as the edgewise ring presentation approaches.
That's true, because you really can't see that when you have the ring angle at such a high elevation.
Right. It's very difficult. It's easy to see the satellites if you're careful where to look, but not crossing the disk like a transit that you see typically on Jupiter or a shadow transit.
Now, is there any observation program for the satellites of Saturn at all?
Yes, we encourage observers to record, you can, if a large enough telescope, observers have been able to see some of the satellites ever so slightly as a disk, but there are ways to estimate the magnitudes of the Saturn, of their satellites using stars of known brightness. And that's quite fascinating for observers to participate in that. That's part of our observing program.
Okay. So what's currently happening on Saturn right now that observers should look for?
Well, the discrete phenomena that I was talking about, some of the white spots that appears at various levels in the northern hemisphere, the white streak that's it's not as visually obvious, but observers are making some drawings of the disk and recording very discrete phenomena. Most of the very small features are showing up in the images, but it doesn't hurt to look for it visually and compare what can be seen visually with what's imaged. It's good to have a comparative set of data.
Very good. Yeah. So you mentioned the types of telescopes that people can use. Pretty much anything over 4 inches is acceptable for being able to see some detail with Saturn.
Yeah, we don't turn any observations away, of course. That's a good for 4-inch refractors or maybe a little larger. But once you move up to a little bit bigger telescope, like a 6-inch Newtonian or 6-inch catadioptric, and upwards from there, you're going to see more and more, assuming the seeing is going to be cooperative. And of course, we encourage observers to plan their observations carefully and use color filters of various known wavelengths, because a lot of the imaging that's going on is taking it red, green, blue wavelengths, as well as some are taken in green light, some are taken in blue light, and then of course observers even do some imaging in the methane band.
So what types of, you mentioned the filters for Venus they're basically a requirement for seeing any detail at all. What type of filters would you recommend for Saturn?
Well, a yellow filter is helpful sometimes. A variable density polarizer can be helpful with Saturn too, to help bring out some of to help reduce some of the contrast with the bright rings. When the opposition occurs on August the 14th, the rings are going to take on what appears as a sudden brightening, because it's called the Seeliger effect, and it will give observers notice how much brighter the rings appear at opposition.
Okay. All right. And you mentioned the observing forums are all online, because you have them for different angles of ring angle, right?
Yes, we do. We have every ring angle that exists right now. The forms for about 14 degrees is what observers are using right now for drawings. And all space on the forms, even if you're imaging, allows you to record the relevant data like telescope, filters, location, name, of course, type of telescope, and so forth.
That's an excellent point. The form is a good guide even for imagers of the type of information you want with the image.
Absolutely.
It's a good point. Very good point. So all the observations are published in the journal?
Correct.
Okay. And then you send most of them off for the Pro-Am collaboration as well.
Yes, our Pro-Am collaboration began back some time ago with the Cassini mission, and the observations that were sent to the Cassini team are still being carefully studied, because the Cassini mission ended back on September the 15th, 2017, and we're still sending observations into the professional groups for monitoring Saturn. And if there are any discrete features that are visible in the northern hemisphere of Saturn or wherever, even in the rings, obviously obviously we will alert they will alert us as well as we can alert them of what we're seeing, and that we can get a good cooperative effort.
Yeah, and you mentioned the alert that's posted, and that's on our website, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any other type of communication with your observers other than the website, or it's pretty much all online that way?
Well, we do that. We correspond back and forth. We talk by phone, and we share data that way. We stay in touch with one another. Anybody that has any questions, they're free to give me a call or send me an email, and I'll be glad to help them out. And we don't discourage anyone as a beginner. Don't think for a minute that your observations aren't worthwhile. The main send them in, and we'll use them at a comparative basis.
Okay. Do you have anything else to add about observing Saturn or your book or anything?
Well, like I said, I'm going to work on getting the book published in a new edition. We've been working on that with a publisher. We're trying to get that set up. That takes a little bit of time because I have to do a lot of proofreading and some refereeing of that to make sure we got everything correct in that and get rid of typos, that sort of thing. Okay. But data coming so fast, we get Saturn observations daily. I'm extremely busy downloading images. In fact, this evening, before I even participated in this call, I had already received like 20 images.
Oh, wow. Anything interesting?
Oh, yeah. Confirming the features on the globe that I was talking about, some dark spots. And some of the observers are seeing exactly the same thing. So that's good comparative confirming data, which is very important.
Great. What type of equipment do you use to observe Saturn?
I use a 6-inch refractor and also a 7-inch Maksutov.
Okay. Yeah, I have a 6-inch Maksutov, and I call it my planet killer because it really gives me some incredible images of the planets.
Oh yeah, once it cools down and you reach temperature, it's wonderful. It emulates a much larger refractor. I really like the catadioptrics because refractors can tend to be very long focal length and kind of cumbersome to move around. But we have observers that are using refractors up to 20 inches.
Yeah, and the older you get, you really can't lug around a bigger refractor anymore, can you?
Yeah, I tell you, they're expensive. But I remember the years when a lot of observers built their own telescopes. I remember A. Jagers years ago used to sell some 6-inch lenses that people built a lot of refractors with those. And then, of course, the catadioptrics, the Schmidt casses. A lot of our observations are made with Schmidt casses, and then we had a lot of them with Maksutovs, and then refractors still come in.
Yeah. Wow. So is there anything else you want to add about the Saturn section before we close this off?
Well, I just want to welcome anyone who wants to participate in our programs, and I'm willing to help any way I can to make the experience even more enjoyable. And beginners are welcome. That's the whole purpose of our existence, to try to move people along and get them involved in our programs. We're reaching out to youth, and I want to make sure that more and more youngsters get involved as much as possible. Instead of sitting in front of a TV watching stuff at home, get out and observe. Enjoy the stars.
I hear it. And Julius is retired, so he has lots of time to look at all your observations. So, inundate him with more photographs and more drawings of Saturn. He won't mind at all.
No, I won't turn away, that's for sure. And if I see any that need some improvement, I'll be glad to work with the observer to help them hone their skills.
Fantastic. Well, Julius, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Yes, it's been a joy. I really appreciated it.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. I want to thank Julius Benton, the coordinator of the Venus and Jupiter section of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, for coming on the podcast today. Hey, get out there and observe those planets, man. They're looking really awesome. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook every few weeks. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I really appreciate it. And we're also available on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Echo, Spotify, and the podcast is also on the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers YouTube channel. How about that? You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon. You can give up to $35 a month, where you'll receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. With that, I want to thank the producer of this podcast, Steve Siedentop, and Michael Moyer for their continued generous support. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, my email address is cometman@cometman.net, or you can grab me on Twitter at ObserversNBPod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.